Rain was falling hard against the city that night. The sound of water hitting the metal rooftops filled the narrow street where Ethan lived. He had spent the entire day fixing broken machines at the workshop. His hands were sore, his back ached, and he only wanted to rest. The small apartment he called home was silent except for the soft hum of his heater. He was just about to turn off the lights when he heard a faint knock on the door. Ethan froze. No one visited him this late. The knock came again, weak and unsure. He walked slowly to the door and placed his hand on the handle. Something deep inside him whispered to stay away. But another part of him felt a strange pull. He opened the door only halfway and the cold night air rushed in. Standing there was a figure that did not belong to this world. A tall woman with silver skin stood in the rain, her hair tangled with dirt and leaves. Her clothes were nothing more than torn rags hanging from her thin body. Water dripped from her elbows and pooled at her feet. Her eyes glowed faintly like distant stars but were dull with exhaustion. In her shaking hands she held 3 crumpled dollar bills. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I only have $3, please. Can I use your shower?" she said, barely louder than the rain. Ethan blinked. He had seen off-worlders before, but only from far away. They worked in the rich sectors or served on starships. This woman looked nothing like them. She looked broken, like someone who had been walking through nightmares. He hesitated, unsure what to do. Letting a stranger into his home was dangerous. Letting an alien was something else entirely. But then he saw her knees trembling under her weight. He saw her lips turn blue from the cold. He saw the fear in her glowing eyes. Fear so human it struck him like a blade. Without speaking, he stepped aside. She hesitated for a moment, as if expecting him to change his mind. When he did not move, she walked inside slowly, almost like a shadow slipping through the doorway. The warmth of the apartment wrapped around her, and she let out a sound halfway between a sigh and a sob. She stood still near the door as water dripped from her hair onto the floor. Ethan shut the door gently. He pointed to the bathroom at the end of the hall. She nodded and moved toward it, her steps slow and uneven. When the bathroom door closed, Ethan stood alone in the small living room, listening to the steady hiss of water as the shower turned on. Minutes passed. He leaned against the wall, trying to understand what had just happened. His life had been silent and predictable for years. Now a strange alien woman was in his shower. He should have been afraid, but instead he felt something else. Curiosity, and a strange, quiet hope he could not name. Steam drifted from under the bathroom door. He heard her quiet sobs mixing with the sound of falling water. He imagined the dirt washing from her silver skin, the cold leaving her bones, the loneliness melting from her eyes. For some reason he wanted her to be safe. A sudden clatter snapped him from his thoughts. He rushed forward but stopped when the bathroom door opened. She stood there, wrapped in a towel that looked too small for her tall frame. Her hair was wet and shining now, the tangled mess replaced by smooth strands that caught the light. Without the layers of filth, her silver skin glowed softly like moonlight. She looked nothing like the broken creature who had knocked on his door. She looked fragile, yes, but also alive. Her eyes met his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, like a moment balanced on the edge of something new. Then her gaze dropped to the floor and she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan nodded. His voice felt caught in his chest. He turned away and fetched an old shirt and trousers from his closet. They were far too large, but they would be warm. He placed them on the table and stepped back. She took them silently. Her long fingers touched the fabric as if it were something precious. Then she disappeared back into the bathroom. When she came out again, the clothes hung loosely on her thin frame. They made her look less like an alien and more like someone who could belong here. Ethan motioned toward the couch and she sat down carefully. He noticed scars on her neck, faint glowing lines that ran across her skin like cracked glass. He did not ask about them. Instead, he brought her a blanket and draped it gently around her shoulders. Outside, the storm kept raging. But inside the small apartment, something fragile had begun to grow. It was not trust yet and not friendship, but it was the first warm thread of it. Ethan sat in the chair across from her and watched her eyelids grow heavy. Within minutes, she was asleep, her head resting on the arm of the couch, her breathing soft and even. Ethan stayed awake. He watched the rain running down the window and thought of the moment he had opened the door. He wondered what path had brought her here, and what path would come next. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about tomorrow. He was thinking about her. Leora sat on the couch wrapped in Ethan's old blanket while the storm outside kept pounding against the windows. The heater hummed softly, filling the room with gentle warmth. She looked so tired that it seemed like the weight of her entire life was pressing down on her shoulders. Her eyes stayed half closed, as if sleep might pull her away at any moment. Ethan stood in the small kitchen, watching her carefully. She had said nothing since whispering that soft thank you. Now she looked like someone caught between two worlds. Her silver skin shimmered faintly under the lamp, glowing in places where scars crossed her arms. The sight made something twist deep in his chest. He had seen people hurt before. He had seen workers at the factory come in with burns or bruises. But this was different. Her wounds did not look like they came from accidents. They looked like someone had tried to erase her. After a few minutes, her gaze wandered toward the bathroom door again. The towel she had used earlier still hung on the rack inside. Ethan could see her eyes tracing it like a thirsty person staring at a glass of water. He stepped closer and spoke gently. "You can use the shower again if you want. This time with soap. There is shampoo too." She lifted her head slowly. It was a small movement, but something shifted in her expression. She gave the faintest nod. Ethan walked to the cupboard and pulled out clean soap bars, a bottle of shampoo, and a soft cloth. He placed them on the bathroom shelf, then stepped away so she would feel safe. Leora rose carefully from the couch, keeping the blanket wrapped around her like armor. She walked to the bathroom door, paused, and glanced back at him. For a second he thought she might run away. Instead, she whispered a single word that almost sounded like thanks, then slipped inside. The door closed with a quiet click. A moment later, water began to fall. Ethan sat back down and listened. The sound was steady and peaceful. It was strange how that sound filled the apartment with a sense of calm. He imagined her standing under the hot stream while the chill left her bones. He imagined the dirt sliding from her skin, falling away into the drain like memories she no longer wanted. Inside the bathroom, Leora stood perfectly still as the warm water hit her back. It felt like touching sunlight. She closed her eyes and let the heat soak into her muscles. The human soap smelled like wildflowers. She rubbed it across her arms and watched the gray grime wash away, revealing the faint shine of her silver skin. The scars along her ribs glowed faintly in the steam. She traced them with her fingers as if trying to convince herself they were only skin now and not chains. She tilted her face up and let the water run through her hair. It flowed down in silver strands like melted moonlight. For the first time in many years, she felt clean, not just on the outside, but deep inside her mind. The constant weight she carried seemed to loosen, even if only a little. When the water finally stopped, the silence was almost strange. She wrapped herself in a dry towel and stood before the mirror. The face looking back at her felt like a stranger. Her cheeks were no longer gray. Her eyes looked brighter. A quiet thought whispered inside her chest. Maybe she could be alive again. She opened the door slowly. Steam curled around her like mist. Ethan turned his head and froze. She stepped into the living room with careful steps. This time her posture was different. Not proud but not broken either. Her silver skin caught the light in soft glows and her wet hair fell neatly down her shoulders. Ethan rose from the chair without thinking. She looked at him and then at the floor, unsure of what to do. He pointed toward the couch and she sat down again, holding the blanket close but no longer like a shield. Her eyes wandered over the small apartment. The cracked table, the faded curtains, the humming heater, things so simple and ordinary. Yet she looked at them like they were treasures. "Thank you," she said again, slightly louder this time. Her voice carried more life now. Ethan sat across from her. "You are safe here," he said softly. She blinked at the words like she was trying to understand them. No one had said that to her in years. Maybe no one had ever said it at all. She rested her hands in her lap and stared at the floor. But there was the faintest curve at the edge of her lips. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. For the next few minutes, silence filled the room, but it was no longer heavy. It felt warm, like a soft blanket around both of them. Outside, the rain began to slow. Inside, something had changed. The alien woman who had knocked on his door for a shower no longer looked like someone passing through the world. She looked like someone who might want to stay. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet night. Moonlight spilled through the cracked curtains and painted pale silver lines across the floor. Leora sat on the couch with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders while the heater hummed softly in the background. Her wet hair had dried into soft waves that shimmered in the dim light. She sat still, almost too still, like someone who feared sudden movement might break the fragile safety around her. Ethan sat at the table with his elbows resting on the wood. He had warmed a bowl of soup for her, and now he watched as she held it carefully with both hands. She sipped in small, quiet motions, as if afraid the food might vanish if she moved too quickly. Every now and then her glowing eyes flickered toward him, then away again. He could feel questions rising inside him. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she alone on this side of the galaxy? Yet something in her silence warned him not to push. She looked like a creature who might run if touched too quickly. When she finished the soup, she placed the empty bowl gently on the table. Her fingers lingered on it as though saying goodbye. Ethan broke the silence. "You have not told me your name," he said quietly. She lifted her head. Her eyes caught the moonlight and reflected it like pools of stars. For a moment she said nothing. Then she whispered one word that sounded both fragile and powerful. Leora. The name rolled softly through the room like a secret carried on starlight. Ethan repeated it under his breath, testing the sound. She gave a small nod as if to confirm that yes, it was real. Leora, he said again, this time with care. It is beautiful. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her gaze. Ethan noticed her long fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket, twisting the fabric like a nervous child. You do not have to tell me anything more, he said. Only what you want to. Her eyes rose slowly to meet his. Something unspoken passed between them. Trust was still far away, but the first step toward it had just been taken. Leora's voice came quiet but steady. I was not meant to be here. I came from a place far from your maps. I was taken. Her tone carried no anger, only emptiness. Like the words were pieces of herself she had been holding too long. They brought me to the mines, she continued. They said I would work until the debt was gone. The debt was never gone. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Ethan stayed still and silent, afraid to break the moment. I escaped, she whispered. There was fire. There was screaming. I ran, I hid. I walked through your cities. No one looked at me. No one saw me. Her voice cracked and faded into silence. The heater hummed softly in the corner. Ethan's chest tightened with something heavy. He wanted to speak but knew words would only sound empty. Instead, he rose and moved to the kitchen. He returned with a small loaf of bread and placed it on the table. He broke off a piece and held it out. Leora stared at it like it was something sacred. Slowly, she reached out and took it. She ate carefully, chewing each bite as though tasting real food for the first time. As she ate, her trembling stopped. The lines of fear on her face softened. For the first time, she did not look like someone about to vanish. She looked like someone anchoring herself to this moment. Ethan watched her quietly. There were still 1,000 questions in his mind, but none of them mattered now. What mattered was that she was here, alive, and no longer cold. When the bread was gone, she leaned back against the couch cushions. Her glowing eyes were heavy with exhaustion, yet there was a quiet peace settling over her, the kind of peace that came from being seen. Ethan spoke softly. You can rest now, Leora. She blinked at him as if unsure she had heard right. You are safe here, he said again. Her lips formed a faint smile. It was small and fragile, but it carried more weight than any words. She lay down on the couch and pulled the blanket closer. Ethan dimmed the lamp. The room slipped into soft shadows. Outside, the moon climbed higher. Inside, Leora's breathing slowed and steadied. Ethan sat in the chair nearby, watching her chest rise and fall. She had crossed the endless dark between stars to reach this small, quiet place. She had been invisible to the world. Now she had a name, and he would not forget it. The night had fallen into deep stillness. The storm was gone and the air was clear, sharp with the smell of wet concrete. Ethan had dozed off in the chair while Leora slept curled on the couch. The heater hummed softly and the city outside felt distant like another world. Then a sound broke through the quiet. A faint electric hum drifted from the street. It was low, almost like the vibration of hidden machinery. Ethan's eyes snapped open. At first he thought it was a passing hover truck, but the noise stayed, steady and slow. He stood and crossed to the window. Through the cracked curtain he saw them. Dark shapes moved between the shadows of the alley. 4 figures in black armor swept silent beams of blue light across the ground. Their helmets glimmered under the moonlight. and strange glowing devices pulsed in their hands. They were scanning, searching. Ethan's heart began to pound. Behind him, Leora stirred. A soft whimper escaped her lips. Her eyes opened, glowing faintly in the dim room. The moment she heard the hum, her body stiffened. "No," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "They found me." Ethan spun toward her. "Who are they?" "Hunters," she breathed. "They track escaped workers." Fear spread across her face like wildfire. Her hands clutched the blanket as if it could shield her from them. Outside, one of the armored figures lifted a scanner. The blue light swept across Ethan's building. It stopped for a moment on his window. Ethan's mind raced. He moved quickly, pulling the curtain closed. The room sank into darkness. He reached for the lamp and shut it off. The only light left came from the faint glow of Leora's eyes. "Stay low," he whispered. Leora slid off the couch and crouched behind it, wrapping the blanket around her body to hide the shine of her skin. She pressed her hands to her mouth to stop the sound of her breathing. Ethan knelt beside her, peeking through a small crack in the curtain. The figures had stopped near the entrance of the building. One of them raised a device to the air. It clicked softly and glowed red. "They know I'm near," Leora mouthed without sound. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He had never been part of anything dangerous. He had fixed machines, paid rent, lived quietly, but now there was no space for hesitation. If they found her, she would be dragged back to whatever hell she had escaped. He grabbed a small metal tool from the table and crossed the room silently. He reached the door and turned the old security latch to lock it fully. The latch clicked softly like a secret promise. Outside, the figures moved closer. Their boots made no sound on the wet ground. Their scanners flashed blue across the walls. The hum grew louder as they approached. Ethan crouched again behind the couch. Leora was trembling. Her eyes were wide with panic, and he could feel the heat of her fear like fire. He placed his hand gently on her arm. She flinched, then stilled. "They will go away," he whispered. "Stay quiet." She nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. Minutes passed like hours. The hunters swept their lights over every doorway. They paused at Ethan's door. One of them held the scanner up. The red glow blinked faster. Ethan held his breath. The hunter placed a black disc on the doorframe. It hissed softly and emitted a faint green mist. Leora buried her face against her knees, trying not to make a sound. Then, just as quickly, the hunter removed the disc and stepped back. He tapped the side of his helmet. The red glow dimmed. The scanner let out a low tone and the group moved on. They disappeared slowly down the street, their lights fading into the distance. The hum grew fainter until the night was silent again. Ethan exhaled and sagged against the couch. His shirt was soaked with sweat. Leora stayed curled on the floor, her whole body shaking. "They almost had me," she whispered when her voice returned. "Not while you are here," Ethan said firmly. She lifted her head. The faint light from her eyes caught on the tears streaking her cheeks. For the first time she looked at him not just with fear, but with something like wonder. "You risked yourself," she said. Ethan gave a small nod. "You deserve to be free." Her lips parted as if she might speak, but no sound came. She only stared at him as though trying to understand why anyone would protect her. The city outside had gone still again. But inside the small apartment, something new had been born. Not just safety, something stronger, trust. Morning light crept slowly across the cracked curtains, painting pale gold lines on the floor. The storm was gone and the air smelled clean, almost sweet. Ethan sat at the small table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in his hands. His mind replayed the night like a broken recording. The blue lights, the silent figures, the way Leora had curled up like a hunted creature. She was still asleep on the couch, her blanket pulled to her chin. Her breathing was steady now, but her face twitched every so often as if she were running from something in her dreams. Ethan's life had always been small and quiet, but now, the quiet felt fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter it. He looked at her glowing scars, faint even in the morning light, and knew silence could not last forever. Hours passed before she stirred. Leora opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the sunlight. For a moment she looked peaceful, almost human in her drowsy confusion. Then memory returned and her body stiffened like a pulled wire. "They came," she whispered. "Yes," Ethan said gently. "They are gone now." She sat up and wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. Her silver skin caught the sunlight like polished stone, but her eyes stayed dark and guarded. "I cannot keep running forever," she murmured. "You do not have to run now," Ethan said. "You are safe here." Leora gave a hollow laugh, soft and bitter. "There is no safe. Not for someone like me." Her words cut through the room like cold wind. Ethan wanted to tell her she was wrong, but something in her voice stopped him. She was not being dramatic. She was telling the truth of her life. He sat down on the edge of the couch, close but not too close. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me what they did." For a long time she said nothing. Her glowing eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Her fingers picked at the edge of the blanket, pulling loose threads as if pulling apart her own memories. Then she began. "I was taken when I was young. My world was green and full of light. I remember soft rivers and the sound of winged birds singing at night. One morning the sky tore open. Ships came down. They burned our gardens. They took anyone who could work. I was small, but they said even small hands could carry ore." Her voice stayed flat, but her hands shook. "They put us on cold ships, no windows, no time. We were numbers, not names. They sent us to mines under dead moons. We worked until our bodies broke. If we slowed, they used the chains. They were made of light, but they burned deeper than fire." She touched the glowing scars on her arms. Ethan's chest tightened. "They told us the debt would end if we worked enough. It never ended. The debt grew. Food was cut. Water was cut. People vanished at night and never returned. We stopped asking why." Her voice cracked then, just for a moment. She swallowed hard and kept going. "One night a storm hit the outer moons. The power failed. The guards panicked. I ran. I stole a service pod. I did not know how to fly it, but the storm carried me away. The pod crashed on your planet's outer ring. I walked for days through your cities. No one saw me. They looked past me like I was nothing. I hid in alleys. I begged for scraps. Every door stayed closed. Until yours." Silence filled the room like water rising around them. Ethan could not speak for a moment. He had known her story would be painful, but not like this. Not so raw. He reached out slowly and placed his hand gently on hers. She flinched, then stayed still. "You are not nothing," he said softly. "You survived. That matters." Her glowing eyes lifted to meet his. They were wet with unshed tears. "I was never meant to survive," she whispered. "Then maybe," Ethan said, "you are meant for something more." She stared at him as if no one had ever spoken to her like that before. The silence between them changed. It was no longer heavy with fear. It carried something new, small but bright. Hope. Days passed slowly inside the small apartment, and something new began to grow. The fear that had once clung to Leora like a shadow started to loosen. It did not vanish all at once. It faded in quiet pieces like winter snow melting under soft sunlight. Ethan cleared the old spare room at the back of his home. It had once been filled with broken tools and scraps from old projects, but he spent hours cleaning it out, sweeping dust from the corners and repairing the cracked floorboards. He found a narrow bed frame at the junk market and patched it with fresh bolts. When he placed the mattress down, it felt like he was planting something fragile and important. Leora stood in the doorway as he worked, silent, but watching. Her eyes followed each careful motion of his hands. She seemed unsure if she was allowed to step inside, like the room was too good for her. "It is yours now," Ethan said simply. She blinked, as if she had not understood the words. Her glowing eyes flickered from the bed to his face. "Mine," she repeated softly. "Yes," he said. "Yours." She stepped inside like someone walking into sacred ground. Her fingers brushed the clean sheets. She stood there for a long time without speaking, her silver skin glowing faintly in the warm light. That night, for the first time, she slept in a bed. Ethan woke early the next morning to the sound of soft humming. He found her in the kitchen, standing by the window as pale sunlight touched her hair. She was humming a melody so strange and delicate that it made his chest ache. When she noticed him, she stopped, almost embarrassed. "It is a song from my world," she said quietly. "It is beautiful," Ethan replied. She tilted her head like she was trying to decide if she believed him. Then she turned back to the window and let the light warm her face. As the days rolled on, small changes filled the apartment. Leora began helping Ethan with simple tasks. At first, she fumbled with the tools, her long fingers unused to human machines, but she learned quickly. She tightened bolts, cleaned engine filters, even sorted wires by color. Ethan showed her how to use the small soldering torch, and she smiled with quiet pride when she made her first perfect joint. She also began to laugh. It was not loud or often, but when it came, it sounded like glass bells in the wind. The first time he heard it, Ethan froze, almost afraid to breathe, as if one wrong move might break the moment. At night, she would sit, cross-legged on the floor, and tell him fragments of her world. She described floating gardens lit by twin suns, rivers of silver water that sang when the wind touched them, and birds with wings like shifting glass. Her voice softened when she spoke of those things, like the words carried her back home. Sometimes when she spoke of the mines, her voice would falter. Ethan never pushed. He only listened. Outside, the neighbors began to notice her too. Mrs. Kellen from across the hall brought over fresh bread one morning. Leora accepted it with both hands, bowing her head slightly in a way that seemed ancient and graceful. The old woman left smiling, whispering to Ethan in the hallway that he finally looked alive again. He did feel alive again. The apartment that had once been silent now carried the sound of Leora's soft footsteps, her gentle voice, her quiet laughter. It felt like color had seeped back into his world. One evening, as they cleaned the workshop table together, Ethan glanced at her and spoke softly. "You are different now." She looked up. "Different how?" "You look lighter," he said. "Like the chains are gone." Leora stared at him, and for a heartbeat her glowing eyes were full of emotion he could not name. "Maybe," she said. "They are." They stood there for a moment in easy silence, surrounded by the faint smell of oil and metal. The world outside could still be cruel, but inside this small place something gentle had taken root. Leora was no longer just surviving. She was living, and Ethan, who had spent years alone in quiet rooms, was no longer alone. Weeks passed like gentle tides. The seasons shifted from cold gray rain to soft golden mornings, and the small apartment changed with them. The air no longer felt heavy. It carried warmth, the kind that comes from laughter drifting through open windows. Leora no longer moved like a shadow in Ethan's home. She moved like she belonged. The spare room had become hers completely. She kept small folded clothes on the shelves Ethan had built from scrap wood. She had lined the windowsill with bright pebbles she found in the nearby park, each one glowing faintly when the moonlight touched them. Ethan would sometimes catch her singing while she worked with the tools. Her voice was quiet, almost shy, yet it filled the apartment like sunlight spilling into a dark place. One afternoon, Ethan returned from the workshop with grease on his hands and tiredness in his bones. He found Leora on the floor of the living room, surrounded by scattered pieces of metal. She was building something small and delicate, a strange star-shaped device that pulsed with soft light. "What is it?" he asked. "A memory lamp," she said. "It stores voices and songs." She placed her hand on the glowing surface and a soft melody filled the air, the same lullaby she had hummed before. It sounded like drifting clouds over silver rivers. Ethan sat on the couch, letting the sound wrap around him. "It is beautiful," he said. Leora's eyes glowed softly as she smiled. "It reminds me that beauty can still exist even here." They ate dinner together that night at the small table, sharing bread and roasted vegetables while the lamp played its quiet song. The silence between them was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of people who did not need to fill every moment with words. Later, when the plates were washed and the lights were low, Leora stood by the window staring out at the quiet street. Ethan joined her. "Do you still think about leaving?" he asked gently. She stayed silent for a moment, then turned her glowing eyes toward him. I used to think I only wanted safety, she said. Now I want more. More, he repeated softly. I want to stay, she said. Her voice was steady. Not because I am hiding, because this is the first place that feels like home. Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. For a long time, he had lived as though his life were a machine, built from gears and schedules. Now she had turned it into something alive. I want you to stay, he said. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything he could not say. Leora stepped closer. She took his hand carefully like it was something delicate and rare. Her skin was cool and smooth, but her touch was steady. You opened your door, she whispered. You saw me when no one else did. You were always worth seeing, Ethan said. For a long moment they stood there, hands entwined, the quiet world holding its breath around them. Outside, the first stars appeared in the deep blue sky. Inside, Leora's eyes glowed softly like twin reflections of those distant lights. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her without thinking. It felt natural, like it had always been meant to happen. Leora closed her eyes. I do not want to just survive anymore, she said. I want to live. With you, Ethan's throat tightened, but he smiled. Then live, he said softly. And so she did. From that night on, the apartment no longer felt small. It felt full. It carried the soft rhythm of two lives moving together. Leora filled the quiet rooms with light, and Ethan filled her empty days with kindness. She had come to his door with $3 crumpled, asking for nothing more than a warm shower. Now she stood beside him, not as a stranger, not as a guest, but as someone who had chosen to stay. Not just sheltered. Home.